Okay, I'm going to tell you a little story about one of the biggest games in Army-Navy football history, the 1926 game in Chicago. It was the dedication of Soldiers Field in Chicago, and in fact a game where Navy became the national champions simply by tying Army 21-21. Here's a picture of Soldier Field taken in 1925. Shows the stadium under construction, and you can see how far removed it is from the city at that time, and I think we're all familiar with Soldiers Field today. Before the game, the Navy midshipmen had a special game day brochure called Red Fire, and this is a specific brochure for the game. They talk about to the team, the coaches. I see Rip Miller's name, Johnny Wilson, Coach Ingram, Bill Ingram. On this page, you'll actually see a picture up here. The left one of the three is Rip Miller. It's a Rip and two Johnnies. This again was Rip Miller's first year of coaching at the Naval Academy. So this is a very rare brochure. I've only seen one, and this happens to be it. There were numerous parties for the midshipmen and the cadets. In my hand, this is a little invitation to a luncheon the Friday before the game. Corps of Cadets, Regiment of Midshipmen, given by Marshall Field. Later on, there was a dinner at the Palmer House given for all of the cadets and midshipmen. This is a copy of this is one of the programs for the 1926 game. Again, you see National Dedication Services of Soldier Field, November 27th, 1926. Plenty of pictures in there. Here's a ticket for the game. The number of people attending was between 120 and 140,000. It was actually the biggest athletic event up until that time. Here is a parking pass for the game. Quite huge, as you can see. Not a lot of cars in 1926, but this is a parking pass for the game. Here's a picture. It was actually taken from the program. It shows the coaches of the 1926 game. Here is Bill Ingram, the head coach. Rip Miller, well known to us Navy fans. Assistant coach John Wilson, whose football I have for the game, which I'll explain in a minute. But this is the coaching staff, and here on the right is Jonas Ingram. Now, at the game, there was plenty of hoopla. I'm going to show you a couple of pins here. This one, it was difficult to see, the gold one. It says Army and Navy football game, Chicago, November 27th, 1926. Here's another one. It's a little easier to see. Army-Navy football game souvenir 1926 showing Soldier Field. Now after the game, of course, Navy was declared national champions. All of the players and the coaches were given a football. This happens to be my wife's bracelet. This middle football, if you can see it, says USNA 1926, and I can't see that real well, but basically it has the score, Army 21, Navy 21. This football belonged to John Wilson, one of the coaches depicted next to Rip Miller. Now, strangely enough, Tom Hamilton, the halfback, also was throwing passes. He kicked the winning or the tying point after touchdown to tie the game right at the end of the game. In 1934, Tom Hamilton became head football coach at Navy, replacing Rip Miller. In 1935, Parker Brothers issued this game called Tom Hamilton's Football Game. This is right in the middle of the Depression, but if you look at this game, football, you see Tom Hamilton football game. It was called Pigskin, and it was a typical board game with directions, cards, chips, that kind of thing. But one thing to note is that the entire 1926 Army-Navy game is depicted on the game chart. The movement of both teams for the entire football game. Down here in the lower left, you'll see footballs, classic Army-Navy, Soldier Field, November 27th, 1926. So this memorabilia is also all associated with the 1926 Army-Navy game, one of the biggest games in Army-Navy football history. You'll recognize this as an Army bathrobe. This bathrobe happened to belong to a member of the class of '63. And as you can see, 3 N stars in football. Now the question is, whose bathrobe was this? If I take it off, you'll notice there's no name in this bathrobe. I've been talking to Vern Von Sydow, a member of 63 team, one of 4 people who had 3 N stars, and he's trying to find out who this robe may have belonged to. Class of '63 was an interesting class. The person who owned this bathrobe actually played with Joe Bellino in the 60 game, and with Roger Staubach in the 62 game. So that's famous Army-Navy bathrobe. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite Army-Navy programs. I have virtually all of them, so I can't show them all to you. But here are some of the older ones. 1913, Army-Navy, Brush Stadium. Brush Stadium, of course, became the Polo Grounds. Next one, 1914, Franklin Field, Philadelphia. Back to New York, 1916, Brush Stadium. We go up to 1919, there were a couple of years where the Army-Navy game was not played because of World War I. Back to Brush Stadium. We then move ahead to 1921. World War I is over. We're back to the Polo Grounds. Polo Grounds, the former Brush Stadium. 1922, Franklin Field, Philadelphia. 1923, back to the Polo Grounds in New York. 1924, first Army-Navy game played in Baltimore. 1925, Polo Grounds. 1926, this is a program I showed you earlier. This is the dedication of Soldier Field in Chicago, Navy National Champions. And finally, 1927, back to the Polo Grounds. So these are some of my older and most favorite Army-Navy programs.